Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about all of the books that I DNF'd this year. I don't think I have any here physically to show you, so I'll put pictures on the screen. So I think I have 10 books on this list. So we're just gonna go through and talk about what I know of them and why I decided to not finish them and why they were DNF. The first is The First Day of Spring, and I've always been intrigued by this book because the cover is gorgeous and it seemed to have the creepy child trope, kind of like The Perfect Child by Lucinda Berry or The Push by Ashley Audrain. And so at the beginning of this book, you are hearing from this little girl's perspective when she murdered someone. And then after that, I had no interest in the little kid's perspective and I couldn't really follow the little kid's perspective very well. And I just felt like nothing happened. I was so bored and there was so many characters and I was confused. And so I DNF'd this at about 40%. Next is The Guilt Trip by Sandy Jones. I actually tried to read this twice because I was really intrigued by the premise and I thought it would be similar to The Guest List by Lucy Foley. And I enjoyed the beginning of the book because they are at the airport and one of the people in their parties loses their passport and so they have to go back and get it. And so they're going through that whole process with the airport. And I traveled for work for 2 years and that was always one of my biggest fear was leaving my ID or not having it when I got to the airport. So that part was kind of funny because it was like my worst nightmare. But after they got to the location where the wedding was going to take place, it was like this girl was just accusing every female of sleeping with her husband. And she would be like, oh, well, my husband isn't in the room right now, so he must be cheating on me. And it was just so overly dramatic and so ridiculous. And there was so many characters that weren't well introduced or well explained. And so I had no idea who was who. I had no idea what was going on. It was just all of these people at this remote wedding location just complaining and thinking that everybody's sleeping with each other. And so I DNF'd this at about 30%. Next is The Club by Ellery Lloyd. I DNF'd this at about 50%. And I thought it would be kind of similar to kind of like the Fire Festival or almost like Inventing Anna, where there's this elite club for the rich and famous, and then things start going awry while they're at this long weekend with all of these rich and famous people. And it was just so boring. And the staff was just complaining about the rich people the whole time, and the rich people were complaining about the staff. I was trying to push through because I have some friends that said they really enjoyed this book, but ultimately, I ended up DNFing it. Next was Zori by Laird Hunt, and I found this at a little free library near me. And it seemed like it was gonna be an interesting historical fiction, but it was basically just a slice of life about this girl living in, I think, the 60s or 70s, and her husband dies and she's on her own. And it's basically just about her travels, and I was just kind of bored. I didn't really care and I wasn't feeling it, so I DNF'd it at about 50 pages. Next, we have The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. I tried so hard. I got like 55–60% of the way through this. But what I have learned is that while I really enjoy Kristen Hanna's writing and while I really enjoy the time period that The Nightingale took place in, which is World War II, I don't actually like books about World War II. I like historical fiction about books that are happening like stateside during that time or things that are happening around the people that are affected by the war, but I don't actually like books about war. So there was just too much war discussion, too much talk about bombs and airplanes and threats. And I tried really hard because I know this book is so well loved and I've loved a Kristen Hanna book before, but like I said, I love the time frame, don't like books about war. Next is The Family Remains by Lisa Jewell. And I read The Family Upstairs a couple years ago and I enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. So I immediately got it from Book of the Month as soon as it was available. But about 60 pages in, I realized that I really just didn't care. I felt like I had closure and I didn't really need to see what the family was doing now. And there was some parts of it that I couldn't remember, but I didn't care to go back and reread or refresh my memory on what happened, so I just went ahead and DNF'd it. Next we have Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson, and I got this because it was one of the Book of the Year options for Book of the Month, and I tried to read this because I thought it was going to be pretty interesting. And the reason I DNF'd this is because there just kept being more and more characters introduced, and I actually had to look and see if this was like a sequel because all of these people just suddenly showed up and we didn't know anything about their past, we didn't know who they were, and just more and more people in this very large family just kept being introduced. And it was almost like there was a whole introductory chapter, or a couple of chapters rather, that just weren't there. And so it was like you're thrown just into the middle of this story, and there wasn't a whole lot of plot. It was really just like you're sitting around listening to a family talk about some like old family stories. And I went back to the beginning and tried to re-listen to it, because I was like, well, maybe I missed something here. So I tried it again, and I still felt the same way, and I just felt confused. And I didn't know who was who, so I went ahead and DNF'd it at about 50 pages. Next, we have The Good Daughter by Karen Slaughter, and I DNF'd this pretty quickly because I really didn't enjoy Pretty Girls, and don't come for me, this is a hot take, but I kind of feel like Karen Slaughter's a little overrated, and I've learned that she's not for me because I gave Pretty Girls 2 stars and I gave Pieces of Her 2 stars. And I started with this one, and it just didn't seem to be any different from any other thriller that I've read, so I DNF'd it pretty quickly. Next, we have The House Next Door by Darcy Coates, and I started reading this for the Thrill Till Halloween readathon, and I will link that vlog. I had pneumonia, but I still think the vlog turned out pretty well, and I did read some good books that weekend, but I decided to DNF this one in exchange for something else. Darcy Coates, I thought, might be a good cozy horror author for me, might be a good intro to horror, but I just didn't care. It was boring, and it felt very Woman in the Window, and it just didn't seem like it was anything different or special than the other haunted house books that I've read. So I DNF'd it at about 100 pages. And then last, we have The Christmas Murder Game, and this gave me vibes of The Family Game meets Alice Feeney. This whole family goes back to this house to play one final Christmas game after their family member passes away, and they're all basically vying for their spot in the will. The reason our main character participates in the games is because she got a letter saying your mother was murdered. She didn't actually commit suicide or die or whatever, but you need to go and play this game with your family in order to learn what really happened. And it just took forever for the first murder to happen, and all of the characters, it kind of reminded me of Clue, where every character was just so ridiculous and over the top and dramatic. And then after the first person dies, I felt like it was just on and on and on of them talking and worrying and being stuck in this house. And I just thought, why am I reading this Christmas book when it's not making me feel in the Christmas spirit? I'm not enjoying it. I should just put it down and read something else that's going to be better. So I went ahead and DNF'd it at about 40%. Okay, those are all of the books, I think, all the books on my list anyway, that I DNF'd in the year 2022. Let me know if you read any of these books and if you enjoyed them, or if you DNF'd them too. Thanks so much for watching. Please hit that subscribe button. It really helps out my channel, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!